When Irmin's soul is altered, memories of those from Tevat are changed, but how much of a book can be rewritten? The folio of foliage does change after Rukkhadevata's deletion, but what about a fable or a fairy tale? In the 3.3 interlude quest, Nahida is able to recount Scaramouche's story through an allegory, where everything is a symbol for something else. It seems then that a work of fiction can recount past events metaphorically, and thus preserve history. This was already implied to us 2 years ago. In Lisa's story quest, we track down the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, a fairy tale that was stolen by an abyss mage. He says it holds the secret. This has got me even more interested in some of the books we have had since early patches, as it always seemed to me like there could be a deeper meaning to many of them. The Pale Princess, Vera's Melancholy, Princess Mina and the Fallen Nation, Flowers for Princess Fischl, etc. Now, Flowers for Princess Fischl sounds familiar because of, well, Fischl, whose real name is Amy and she just apparently likes to LARP. It's one of the few books where we know the author's name. In this case, it's Mr. 9. The book that really captures my interest, however, is the other book by Mr. 9, The Legend of the Shattered Halberd. It's a collection mentioned in Xingqiu's story quest. Actually, Xingqiu only really joins you because he's a nerd and wants to find and read the last volume, which is out of print and super rare to find. The Legend of the Shattered Halberd carries a lot of themes of godly conflicts and the cyclical destruction of the world. It also has a lot of interesting references, which makes me very suspicious of Mr. 9. We technically only get excerpts from each volume, but I'll start by summarizing the parts that we do know. In the ancient past, there were 9 realms. Shenqiao was the heavenly realm, while Zhongshou was the earthly, leaving 7 to be named. Then a war broke out amongst the gods, and the God King, or Celestial Emperor, fell during this calamity, destroying all life and razing the realms. However, the realms were reborn with life anew, and now the worlds are just no longer connected. In the new earthly realm, the story follows a young man named Mir, an ignorant borderland heathen who encounters a court emissary named Weiyang. She's real mad that her court-appointed journey is interrupted because she needs to use the bathroom. Her mission is to find a meteorite, a national treasure stolen from the court, that was used to create a series of cursed weapons that destroy the mind. We also learn that Mir wants to clear his family name, which was tarnished because of some embezzling scheme of his father's. Weiyang is possessed by the spirit of the Celestial Emperor's daughter, who has allegedly forgotten her name. Mir trades an eyeball to make peace with the spirit deity Ghost, who we will call the Princess. And Mir learns from the Princess that the meteorites were actually pieces of a divine halberd. So the spirit wants to reclaim the titular Shattered Halberd to save the world from destruction, specifically from burning in hellfire. They go traveling to find all 9 ominous swords, and the spirit already has like 3 of them, including the Mist Sword. The next one they find is the Sword of Flame, aka the Kataku Gosha, made from the runes of the Fire Realm, which is one of the 9 realms. Unfortunately, its wielder is not friendly and had neutralized Mir's father. He's like super powerful because he was hand-selected by the Celestial Emperor to ascend and join a heavenly army. But Mir manages to beat him anyway as Mir whips out his father's sword, which turns out to be the most cursed of the ominous swords. It's called Leviatane, and it once had destroyed the old world. With the fire rune of the Sword of Flame, it's now reinvigorated, so it may destroy the world once again or something. Cool. Also, in the preview for this part of the story, there's a Star Wars reference with the reveal that Mir's father, Mitingren, was not actually Mir's biological father, and is actually Khan the Asura from Jotunheim. And there are a few other things that we learn. One is that the family name was tarnished not because of some politics or embezzling, but because Mitingren, aka Khan, wanted to protect the Celestial Emperor's daughter. The second is that the Celestial Emperor went to war with the Asura, and this was called the Hunt from Above. This is the army that the Flame Sword wielder was a part of. The third is that despite the fact that the Celestial Emperor went to war with the Asura, Tingren, aka Khan, used to be friends with the late Celestial Emperor. And the fourth is that the same late Celestial Emperor is now the Contramundi. And in Chinese, this reads as enemy against the world. Anyway, back to the story. I guess they eventually get most, or at least like 6, or even all the pieces of the Divine Halberd, because Mir comes face to face with the Crown Prince, like the normal human Crown Prince, not a celestial one, who offers Mir a high-ranking position in exchange for the Divine Halberd. We learn that Mir's mother was the Crown Prince's wet nurse, so they have some history together. Mir eventually gives him half of the halberd, and the Crown Prince is delighted to have a national super weapon? Not concerning at all. The first 5 volumes, despite being complicated, are very linear compared to the 6th volume. It's almost like Game of Thrones Season 8, but not so much rushed and confounding as just chaotic and a complete tone shift. In the 6th volume, the God King is resurrected and faces off against his daughter, the princess. We learn that the first Divine Halberd, Irmin, once pierced the Axis Mundi and connected the realms, and its replicas populated the heavens. Predicting the madness that would follow his death, the God King, the Celestial Emperor, created the final Divine Halberd, his daughter, the Prinzessin der Verurteilung. And yes, this is Fischl. Not Amy that we know, but the fictional Fischl that Amy LARPs. This was actually hinted at earlier on when the princess said that her role in heaven was as a judge, conducting trials and sentencing. And Prinzessin der Verurteilung translates to Princess of Condemnation. Also, the Prinzessin der Verurteilung is in both the Shattered Halberd and Flowers for Princess Fischl, but in an interview, Mr. Nine states that the Celestial Emperor's daughter was basically completely rewritten in Flowers for Princess Fischl. So, basically an XB. But it's unclear how linked the actual worlds of Flowers for Princess Fischl and Shattered Halberd are. So, what secrets might this story hold? We are only given excerpts, and we may not even have enough information yet to figure it out. But let's start with the titular halberd. It's not really clear what exactly the Divine Halberd is. It's described first as something mistaken for a meteorite. Perhaps a chunk of ore or metal that could be forged into a weapon? But they suck out brain juice and portend destruction and calamity. Levitane, for example, turned the world to cinders before, and may once again, and the princess needs to collect them to avoid the world burning in hellfire. In a later volume, it's mentioned that a shard of the Divine Halberd was the Dharani of the Fire Realm. Dharanis are Buddhist chants or incantations. Specifically, they're a form of amulets that have the ability to protect from evil and calamity. This may imply that the halberds also have a cleansing quality to them. Now, this all seems at odds with one another, as the swords crafted by the halberds seem kinda cursed, draining one's intellect, but at the same time are imbued with protective runes? But we actually know of some heavenly spears, often broken into pieces, maybe mistaken for meteorites, dangerous to a person's mental state, yet also have the ability to ward off corruptive powers, and may have the potential to be used as weapons. Based on these simple descriptions, and I want to emphasize that this is heavy speculation, I can't help but to make a connection to the celestial nails. In the chasm, it's driven over and over again that the crystals and fragments derived from the Spirit Stone seem to combat the dark mud, but it also caused some miners to go insane. The Staff of Scarlet Sands also says the spikes were used to heal the earth of poison, and this is also echoed in the Amethyst Circlet. However, the circlet also resonates with another message, which echoes the dialogue of the Black Serpent Knights. They speak of the nails in terms of destruction and retribution, injustice and judgment. I mean, it is also interesting that the God King destroying the world following a divine war does seem reminiscent of the Primordial One's war against the Second Throne. Now, these connections alone do not contain any revelations. And on top of that, Volume 6 adds in so much confusion. The Divine Halberds are people who have names, with Irmin being the first and the Prinzessin as the last. At the end of the story, the God King says, in this moment, it, nay, she, could finally unleash her true self. This seems to imply that they start off as objects and gain sentience? Regardless of any interpretation, this doesn't make much sense with the book's previous descriptions of meteorites and ores and Duranis and swords. The only way I can reconcile the last volume is that it's likely there are multiple metaphors fused and rolled up into Legend of the Shattered Halberd. It's not a one-to-one analogy, and perhaps symbols could have multiple meanings. Because remember, as Aristotle said, the purpose of poetry is not to describe what has happened, but what may happen. History deals with singulars, with particulars, while poetry expresses the universal. Okay, yeah, so why name the Halberds? Why personify them? Is this unearthly material literally forged into divine puppets who gain sentience? Are they beings summoned by the God King to mend the earth, just as the nails do? Or is it even more abstract, with mortals collecting the Halberd fragments, and thereby gaining ownership of its power? Yeah, I'm just spitballing here, and I have no clear answer. But there's another thing I want to explore, and that's related to the first Halberd, Irmin, and the mystery of Mr. Nine. Mr. Nine is pretty suspicious given his bibliography. Let me be direct with my tinfoil-hat theory. I think Mr. Nine is from Khaenri'ah. I mean, I guess he could also be like a descender, or at the very least, he has access to some pretty wild information. Like, Khaenri'ah has the strongest ties to Norse and Germanic mythology in-game, or at least Wagner's operas based on it, with Alberic, Daneslif, Rheindotir, Halfdan, and so on. The Shattered Halberd is dripping with references to Norse and Germanic mythology. First, we have the Axis Mundi and the Nine Realms, which seems clearly inspired by the Norse Nine Worlds, and also the Taoist Nine Layers of Heaven. The Axis Mundi, or Axis of the World, is a real-life concept in comparative mythology, and represents the axis connecting realms. Or, more simply put, the link between heaven and earth. This is often either a pillar or a tree. Then we have this easily missable reference, Mir himself. In the first volume, we learn that Mir's father is named Mi Tingren, and the family name is Mi. This would make Mir's full name Mir. Mimir is a figure in Norse mythology associated with wisdom. Odin sacrifices his eye so that he can drink from Mimir's well and obtain secret knowledge from its waters. In other stories, Odin carries around Mimir's decapitated head as it gives him secret knowledge and counsel? Now, this Mir isn't directly a reflection of Mimir, but his story does echo the mythos. And it's also fun to note that Mimir's name is likely related to the modern word for memory. Then there's Jotunheim. Mir's non-biological father is from Jotunheim, the realm of Asuras that the Celestial Emperor went to war with in the Hunt from Above. Now, in Norse mythology, the names of the original Nine Worlds aren't explicit in text, but some scholars have tried to attribute names to them, and in these interpretations, Jotunheim is one of the Nine Worlds. It's the realm of giants and trolls and other non-human, non-divine beings. And interestingly, Mimir's well sits beneath one of the three roots of Yggdrasil, the World Tree, in Jotunheim. But that's not all. There's also Levitain. Levitain is the sword that Mir inherits from his father, and it turns out to be the most cursed of the ominous swords. In Norse mythology, Levitain is the sword, or a wand or hurdy stick, a weapon of sorts, needed to slay the bird that sits atop the World Tree. It was also created by Loki, who is probably from Jotunheim himself. At face value, these are just neat little references that connect to one another and help create a rich tapestry for a microcosm of lore. And it illustrates to me that Mr. Nine may have knowledge most people don't. Let me put it this way. Aside from this book, anytime in-game we see a Norse name, it's a Khaenri'ah thing. And then there's this one last reference. The first divine halberd, Irmin, once pierced the Axis Mundi and connected the Nine Worlds. This is so prominent because Irmin has another, much later mention in-game, in an easily missable note tucked away in a box, hidden behind a brick, atop the Knights of Favonius HQ, only during a limited time event. Here, we learned of the one-eyed King Irmin of Khaenri'ah. In terms of inspiration, Irmin is a figure in the creation myths of the Germanic tribes, and on Wikipedia you'll read that it could have been an epithet for Odin, or Woden or Wotan, the Germanic version. Now, technically this gets a little mucky as it's unclear whether Irmin was alternatively his own deity or if he was an epithet for Tyr, another god, but I just wanted to preface with that, so instead of oversimplifying it to Irmin is Odin, I wanted to suggest that there's enough of a connection between the two to merit the writers combining them. Anyway, that was just a really long-winded disclaimer. And there's so much referencing Odin in-game. For example, Mimir trading his eye in Shattered Halberd. The princessin in Flowers for Princess Fischl is also an oblique reference, having one eye and a raven companion, just as Odin had raven companions who watched the world for him. Another one was recently revealed in the Silver Twig, an item received at the end of the Sumeru Archon Quest. It describes a sage hanging upside down from a tree to acquire knowledge and wisdom of runes and sacred words. This seems like a very straightforward reference to Odin hanging from Yggdrasil, the world tree, to gain wisdom and secret knowledge. And I've always thought that the deathly statuettes carried by the Black Serpent Knights do share a resemblance to Odin imagery and artwork. And, well, King Irmin had one eye, and these are Knights of Khaenri'ah carrying this relic. This is all to say that King Irmin seems to be inspired by Odin, and Mr. Nine references Odin and Norse mythology constantly in his books. It's also interesting that Mr. Nine calls the first halberd Irmin. Now, are all these facts taken together supposed to imply then that the King of Khaenri'ah had divine origins? Was Khaenri'ah truly a godless nation, or was there maybe some revisionism? Was this a way, perhaps, for Mr. Nine to record a true aspect of the history of Khaenri'ah? Again, heavy speculation. It's impossible to say at this point. It is possible Irmin was of divine origin, but was held in a different regard by Khaenri'ah compared to nations ruled under Celestia. Or maybe Mr. Nine just loved the king's name and wanted to use it in his book, I don't know. I do think there's another interesting message in the book. And it's about how collecting the Shattered Halberd can be used to save the world, and or as a powerful weapon. This is your high-octane tinfoil hat theory warning. The legend of the Shattered Halberd describes how the Halberds can give their wielder power if they can control it, for example with the Katakugosha, and how the Crown Prince desires the halberd to use as a weapon for his nation. I mentioned very offhandedly that this is also a quality of the Celestial Nails. One of the Black Serpent Knights says before fighting him, "Even the ominous thing that came down from the heavens shall be ours to use." Given that all the other Black Serpent Knights seem to speak of the Celestial Nails, it seems entirely possible that this ominous thing that came down from the heavens is a Celestial Nail that shall be ours to use. This isn't the first time we've had some message like that. The messages from the Ruin Guards on Dragonspine also allude to this power in their cryptic message. For this nation, we can't forego this skyborn power, but we failed. This skyborn power seems to refer to the Skyfrost Nail, and perhaps the Ruin Guards were there to collect it. Now, these are only two cryptic instances, but from just these two data points, it seems that Khaenri'ah, or more specifically Irmin, sought to repurpose the Celestial Nails. I mean, we know that the Divine Halberd can connect the realms and pierce the God King. Maybe Irmin sought the nails perhaps to overthrow the gods or seek vengeance and pierce the God King. Or perhaps it was to aid Schwanenritter in the onslaught of dark beasts. Maybe they had done it multiple times for different reasons. And maybe Irmin had even succeeded. Hear me out. There's been a lot of theorizing that there should be a Celestial Nail on Tsurumi Island, but we don't see one. Where is the Celestial Nail? Perhaps someone took it. Perhaps someone already collected the Sword of Mist. Listen, I'm just saying, I think it's very interesting that the Tsurumi Island quest, Through the Mists, has multiple references to Mr. Nine and Flowers for Princess Fischl. Oh, but speaking of random things mentioned in that quest, there is one final and often forgotten reference to a Khaenri'ah not just seeking the power of a celestial weapon, but wielding it.
My grandfather's treasure is a sword. A magic sword that grants the wielder unrivaled power. The sword was dropped from Celestia into the sea by a god. It was later salvaged by my grandfather's crew by pure coincidence. The moment he gripped the sword, thunder roared, billows howled, and the clear skies were suddenly swallowed by raging winds. With the might of the magic sword, my grandfather went on to defeat a hydra, a silver-haired banshee, a wicked abyss dragon. But the immense power of the sword enticed many more greedy pirates. To avoid meaningless conflicts, my grandfather hid the magic sword. The world we live in is fascinating, full of unknown and inexplicable wonders.
For the record, I don't think Kaeya lies as much as people say he does. It's more like how you read relationship advice posts on Reddit and OP is like, oh, I'm changing a lot of the details so the other party doesn't find this. But please, Hoyo, I beg, give me more pirate grandpa! So, to recap, fairy tales can hold the secrets of history, and the legend of the Shattered Halberd may hold some of them. I wonder if the Halberds are a symbol of the celestial nails, and if the story hints that they can be, and maybe once had been, repurposed as weapons. I do think Mr. 9 is from Khaenri'ah, and I'm super sus of how we have so little information about King Irmin, yet the hints we do have suggest a link to divinity. Weird for a godless nation, huh? There was a lot of speculation in this, and I'm probably wrong about a lot of things. But isn't the true secret hidden in the Genshin lore just the friends we made along the way while wearing our tinfoil hats? Thanks again for watching my longest video yet, by far. I really appreciate everyone. Do share your own theories in the comments, and make sure to slap around the like and subscribe and notification bell buttons. I usually co-host a stream with Desu over on Twitch, so drop in sometime and say hi. We cover lore, character and story analysis, and we get real goofy. Sometimes degenerate. Alright, well that's all, so see ya on the flip side.